Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our witnesses as well as the new members who have joined our committee in this new Congress. Look forward to all of your participation. The subcommittee has not held a hearing since October 2nd of last year, which strikes us as pretty extraordinary. Speaker Pelosi stood up this committee to deal with the pandemic. Yet we've gone 5 months without a single hearing during some of the most impactful months of the pandemic. 5 months, that is, without having investigations on school reopenings, on the mental health and drug addiction crisis we're seeing, to deal with China and the World Health Organization and the role they played, to look at vaccine rollout, the nursing home death scandal, as well as COVID that's now spreading in some of our communities at America's open southern border. Instead, the Select Subcommittee went silent during this period. Today it does reopen, but for the sole purpose of serving as Speaker Pelosi's PR machine to tout the Payoff to Progressives boondoggle bill that passed on a strictly partisan vote last week. When this subcommittee was created, the majority made a point of emphasizing the desire to model it after the Truman Committee, which we had during World War II, a committee that strove to make sure the federal government spent taxpayer money wisely and effectively. But instead, what we've seen is just attempts to cheer spending nearly $2 trillion, over 90% of which, by the way, had nothing to do with the health needs or reopening schools. And then to argue that we're hearing this week, more taxes need to be raised, more spending, maybe trillions more in spending need to be made. Where does this end? A year into the pandemic, shouldn't the Select Subcommittee be focusing on lessons learned? There are many, good and bad, by the way. We do know that inflation-adjusted dollars, all of World War II cost $4 trillion. We now have spent over $5.5 trillion. And much of that money, by the way, still remains unspent. If we look, hundreds of billions of dollars from previous COVID relief bills are still unspent. If this subcommittee was truly modeled after the Truman Committee, this Select Subcommittee should be the leading voice in Congress, educating the American people that some governors managed their states dramatically better than other governors. And we could be sharing those best practices, which, by the way, those best practices in the states, these incubators of democracy, could be shared to save us trillions of dollars, seeing how some did it well, some did it poorly, surely not replicating what was done in the states that didn't do it well, and trying to amplify the voices of the states who did it well so others can do it. The minority asked all year to hold hearings on China and the role that the World Health Organization played at being China's mouthpiece in those early days when they instead could have been helping us confront the crisis that no one knew about that was coming out of Wuhan. The majority refused that request. Now even the Washington Post editorial board has written, quote, "We're still missing the origin story of this pandemic. China is sitting on the answers," close quote. We should be trying to get those answers. The Post editorial board is also asking the same question that we've asked the majority on the subcommittee from the beginning. Quote, "What is China trying to hide about the origins of the pandemic and why?" Close quote. Other voices from both the left and the right have raised the same concerns, but the silence from the majority rings loudly. Mr. Chairman, China's lies and the World Health Organization's cover-up cost us 500,000 lives, not just here in America, but all around the world. It could have saved millions of lives. Where is that bipartisan outrage? On June 14th, the minority wrote the governors of 5 states a letter asking for information about deadly nursing home policies that forced COVID-positive patients back into nursing homes against the CMS guidance that was out there. The majority ignored us. If they would have joined us, we could have gotten those answers. History now shows that we were right in asking those questions. And now it has come out that Governor Cuomo of New York initiated a potentially criminal cover-up, specifically designed to hide those facts, not just from us in Congress, but from the people of New York, the families of those thousands of people who never should have died who are still, by the way, demanding answers. Those families deserve answers. We're going to keep fighting until we get those answers. Whether Governor Cuomo wants to comply or not, the answers are going to come out. And you're seeing people, even with his own administration, that don't want to go down with a sinking ship, that are finally starting to speak out. I would encourage any official in the state of New York who has that information to get it to us. Don't be complicit in Governor Cuomo's cover-up. Enough reports are out there that he tried to hide this data. They were on a call with state senators in New York bragging about the fact that they hid the data. Don't be involved in a cover-up. Thousands of families in New York want and deserve answers. The rest of the country can learn from those deadly mistakes. I would encourage everyone in New York, from Governor Cuomo on down, to share that information. Right now, you're seeing Democrat colleagues even calling for Governor Cuomo's resignation, in part citing the nursing home scandal, in addition to his sexual harassment scandals. But the silence from Democrats here in Congress rings volumes. Just last week, we again asked for a hearing on this scandal. I would urge the committee to bring this up. A year into this pandemic, we know many cities made devastating mistakes on school closures. Back in March and April of last year, maybe the mistakes then would have been understandable. But now we have the data, we have the science, we know what is happening to our young children all across the country. And by the way, the science is loudly saying the kids need to be back in the classroom. It can be done safely. There's a roadmap out there for doing it. The American Academy of Pediatrics has laid that out. We've also seen it from CMS. Even the CMS director under President Biden acknowledged that kids could be back in school. We put hundreds of billions of dollars out there for this, by the way, in previous relief packages. Some school systems chose to actually spend this money and get kids back in the classroom. Unfortunately, it's only about 40% of America's students who are back in the classroom. The damage that's being done to millions of kids, not because of the science, but because of the unions who don't want to go back to school. In fact, they were just urging teachers, they can go to spring break while they're not in the classroom. Just don't post pictures of you being on spring break. That tells you what's going on. There is a tremendous disservice. And so many teachers want to be back in the classroom, and yet their unions are fighting to hold them out. These kids are suffering. We're seeing mental illness off the charts. We're seeing opioid abuse, including deaths and suicide, off the charts, not to mention, Mr. Chairman, the long-term damage that's being done to these kids that are being held back and left behind. None of us should stand for that. We should all be having hearings and calling for hearings on this scandal, and let's fight to get our schools reopened and follow the science. We hear we can't open schools until this money is spent. Schools need to upgrade. Of course, we already spent hundreds of billions in relief that was targeted to getting schools open, so that money is available for anyone who wanted it. But some schools that chose to serve the children opened, some bowed to the unions. We need to look at the science and follow it and open our schools. This may be one of the biggest public policy mistakes that America has seen by these systems that are still refusing to open up their schools to in-classroom learning. The per capita death rate from COVID in California and Florida are about the same. New York's is much higher than both. California and New York, of course, locked down, crushed businesses, so many that will never reopen. Schools and churches that are closed. Their unemployment rates are 9 and 8.8% in New York and California. Florida, while facing very misguided criticism, opened up their schools and businesses and followed the science and did it safely. Their unemployment rate is about 4.5 to 5%, less than 5%. So after 5 months with no hearings, Mr. Chairman, it seems like today's hearing should be about the different experiences we've seen in states, some that stayed locked down and some states that safely opened, and how to share those best practices. Because if the Select Subcommittee modeled this after Harry Truman and what he did with the Truman Commission, the conclusion would be that we could have saved trillions of dollars by focusing on the most vulnerable in our society, by redirecting ourselves to ending inequality in our education system, by simply following the science, by analyzing the data that's out there now after a year of shutdowns, and acknowledging that American ingenuity and things like President Trump's Operation Warp Speed are the path to getting out of this pandemic. Look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back.